You can call it the return of Darth Vader. Last time we was talking to this individual, he was running an NFL franchise. Now he's joining some pretty elite investors in Chicago. Diving into Jason Wright's transition, coming right up. Hello, everyone. This is Jabari Young here at our Forbes studio, and I am joined by Jason Wright. He is the former president of the Washington Commanders NFL franchise, and now at Ariel Investments, where he is helping to start a new fund. And for those who don't know, Ariel Investments, Chicago-based money management firm with over more than $13 billion asset under management. More than $13 billion. That's a lot of money. Jason, thank you so much for joining, man. It's good to see you again.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for making time for me.
Hey, man, listen, the last time we did this, we was in suite 439, was it?
Oh, you got it. You got it. I was reading back through the piece, and I said I was having flashbacks, both good and bad. Of that, I felt it in my body of the transition that we had to take that organization through. And, you know, in joining Ariel this last year, it was such a pleasure to watch the team do so well on the field and off the field in my last year there. And going back to those moments where I was in crisis and we were trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel, I couldn't be more happy with how we left.
And for people who don't know, the team he's talking about is the Washington Commanders. Yes. Right? As the Washington Commanders. I mean, listen, that was when I go back and flashback at that day, I forget it was a big, giant, dark storm that was coming over the field.
Right. That's right. Wow, that's right.
What symbolism going on, man? But you started, we were talking about the Commanders, and as we move forward now, one last flashback, right? Well, two. We'll get into the other one later. But anything that was so fascinating, because you were behind the scenes, you probably got a chance to see Jaden Daniels like, you know, the public doesn't, right? Anything that stood out about that kid, man? Because, I mean, I think he's coming. I love Jaden Daniels. He is a very, very fun player to watch. I thought they were going to beat the Eagles. I really did. I thought but they gave the ball away 3 times. Y'all gave it away 3 times.
That's right.
But is anything that maybe someone don't know or doesn't get talked about enough that you've seen that's going to continue to help his star shine?
That's right. I think the combination of Jaden and Dan Quinn is, I think, what's special. Jaden is unique in his maturity. For I always say kid. He's not. He's a grown man.
Grown man, yeah.
But a man his age who has just come into all of the hullabaloo that is the NFL, the wealth, the attention in a city like D.C. that if you walk out the house and you're Jaden Daniels, will embrace you in good and bad ways. His focus and his maturity is so intense that all of those distractions that can normally sideline somebody, distract them, eat away at their performance, are just not there. The guy comes in at 4 a.m. He's the first person there. He's the last person to leave. He hasn't stepped out in D.C. except with his mother. Yeah. Like, this man is intensely focused, and all he cares about is performance on the field. And there are only a few people I've seen like that over the course of my career, and they are all future Hall of Famers. And I put him in that same category. And I think he's complemented really well by a head coach in Dan Quinn, who's a true cross-cultural leader. There are very few head coaches, much less non-Black head coaches, who are universally loved by players across all races, all backgrounds, and all demographies. And he is one of them. When he was hired, I got texts from everybody I know across generations of players saying, that's the guy. He's the guy you want building a locker room. Yeah. And so a combination of somebody who can truly lead all men and a focused leader on the field, the future bodes incredibly well for them, and I'm really, really excited for them. I'll be a fan for good.
Yeah, make sure they send you a ring if they want to, because you put up with some stuff.
I feel like that had to be this year. Now it's like too much of a lag, but I'll take it.
Look, I'll sign a petition. You had to, right? You put up with some stuff, okay? You got them through some transition. They owe you a ring, man. But listen, you're moving on, and this, starting and getting into some news. You guys at Ariel Investments, the managing partner, head of Project Level. And this is a new fund that's dedicated to investing in women's sports. And you already have one in the NWSL.
That's right.
They have a new franchise in Denver. Take me on the inside of Project Level first. How did the name come to Project Level? Where do you get that from? And what are you guys doing with this fund?
We're at a moment in women's sports where the quality of performance on the field, court, and pitch for women has always been high. You can think of women's sports stars like Serena Williams and Mia Hamm and Alex Morgan and Candace Parker and Lisa Leslie. The performance on the field, court, pitch has always been very high. The businesses around them have not always been at that same level that allows them to have the infrastructure and support that allowed the whole industry around women's sports to have the economics that are commensurate with the level of play. And Project Level is about leveling up the entire ecosystem and the entire industry of women's sports to match the phenomenal performance that has always been on the court, pitch, and field. And right now, it is suddenly a viable business proposition. And that's why this is a moment for us to come in and do something slightly different than others have done. There are many folks investing in sports at scale, but they've been a sort of throwaway focus on women's and emerging sports. And there have been folks that are laser focused on women's sports, but haven't quite gotten to the scale. They've done great work investing in the industry, improving the points, but they haven't gotten to scale. We're coming in at scale so we can make catalytic investments at a time when the whole industry is taking off. And we're very excited about it. And we feel great about it.
Yeah. And what are you going to do differently? Because you just said, again, there's a lot of people that are investing. This is a new asset class, right, for a lot of people. And women's sports, I'm very bullish on it, but I want to play contrarian view in a minute because I was calling around and, we're talking about this topic. Marcus Coulson is another one. He just started a new fund at Champion Venture Partners, and I was just talking to him the other Monday. Yep. And, we're going over all the things that he's doing with this fund and what they want to do. And I'm thinking like, man, there's a lot of funds being open, but there's only so much that you can be able to grab, right? So what is the opportunity? What are you guys going to do differently that an investor would say, yeah, I'm going to roll with Ariel and Jason because I like what they're doing and these guys over here aren't doing it?
Right. We can come back to the fundamentals of women's sports and why we should all be bullish about it. But uniquely for us, I think there's two things that differentiate. One is the scale. The second thing that differentiates us, which is the diversity of the fund. We're coming in with commercial terms for our investors, which means we're not saying you got to hold on to this for 25 years. In order to see your return. And that's what happens when you're only investing in the teams in the mature leagues, NWSL, WNBA, Women's Super League. And we most certainly will be in those over time. We'd like to be multiple team owners across those leagues. And we've got a good start there. But we also want to invest in the pipeline that leads to those. What is the next set of leagues that could be a major league? Volleyball, softball, lacrosse. And where does the talent come from to fill those leagues? College sports and youth sports, which have amazing economics, especially in the youth sports, sector. And then beyond that, we want to invest in the entire infrastructure that supports those teams and leagues. And so we're going to invest in professional services businesses and the vendors that support those teams, data analytics companies, health, wellness, and recovery companies, and the live, work, play real estate developments that surround the venues that women play in. All of those are more traditional private equity profile in terms of return and investment profile. And therefore, we have a more diverse set of things that our investors can bank on. They can go into it with commercial terms. It's not a social impact play. It's real money.
Yeah. How would you explain Project Level to that person who may not get any of this, but they hear that you are involved in women's sports, you're investing in women's sports? I have a daughter now. She's interested in basketball. She's playing. You have kids. And so like they're interested in it. How would you explain it to that person on the bus?
Yes, I would. In plain speak, I'd say, do you have a daughter, cousin, sister, somebody who played sports at high school or above? If you did, you've seen that women can play, period. What's happening now is people are taking notice. 500 million more people watch the Women's World Cup final than the men's. And that carries down domestically. More people watch the NCAA Final Four for women than they did for men. More people watch the NWSL final than MLS final, so on and so forth. The growth of women's sports is there in live attendance as well. 48% growth year over year for the WNBA, 26% growth year over year for the NWSL. So the growth is there. So the women can play. People are taking notice. And now the money is following. Angel City Football Club was purchased in 2020 for about $2 million, best our estimate. It sold a year ago for $250 million. Anybody would take those returns. And while you say maybe it's inflated, maybe that's too much, it's already peaked out. And that's what we've heard from some folks. Hey, you're coming in late, actually. The growth was already there. It doesn't have to grow that much more for it to be a good investment. While Angel City's at $250 million, that's the most expensive women's team in the world. The Dallas Cowboys are almost $11 billion in valuation. We don't have to catch men's sports in order to see great returns for our investors and see these women start to get the commensurate business support they deserve.
So you don't buy it at 250 is maxed out?
No.
You don't?
No. You don't have to. You don't have to believe that women will get to parity in men's valuations to see that there's growth there. I think there's growth. There's different types of growth across this entire ecosystem, which is why we're investing across it. But NWSL for sure, WNBA for sure. Women's Super League and soccer in Europe is interesting because they are just now starting to separate and carve out and really give the women their own economics and see if it can grow. And I think it's a few years behind the NWSL, but what can be there. So those we believe in. That next set of leagues, it's going to take time. They're not going to be there overnight. But if we look at the evaluations for the NWSL and WNBA, they are where the NBA was in the early 2000s.
Right.
If League One volleyball and the women's side of Premier League lacrosse and some of these other emerging leagues grow at that same rate, they will be there in that 10-year time frame. This does not take that long to get there. And so not all of them will make it, but we're going to invest across the ones with great leadership teams and solid business models that do. And I think the smart ones, and League One volleyball is one of them, they've also invested in the youth infrastructure underneath. And so the participation, the clubs that exist in that given sport are part of that league that builds some fan affinity and some connection. And it builds a more diverse business that isn't just relying on the pro league to take off for it to be successful.
Right.
And I think those are good models. Premier League lacrosse is doing the same thing, investing in the ecosystem of players of lacrosse across the board.
Yeah. You've been in NFL, right? You understand how this goes. Media rights is the main driver of all of this stuff.
That's right.
And so when I hear the word growth, I'm thinking, okay, well, that means more expensive media rights. Who's going to pay? All right. ESPN just dropped Major League Baseball because they're capped. They just signed the NBA. 75. So who's going to pay for these rights, for these valuations to go up? Because I think it's all tied in.
Yeah, I think there are more media players than before, and women's has shown much better numbers on streaming than we've seen in other sports because the consumer of women's sports is younger. They're a bit more sophisticated. They're not afraid to jump channels. It doesn't have to be every Thursday night on the same streaming platform. It doesn't have to be every Monday night on the same network. They're okay finding their games. They've become adept at that. And that's why we've seen the viewership of women's sports triple in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And so it's going to continue. And the platform, they're a bit more platform agnostic, which I think gives some more upside to this. Now, it's going to look different than the media deals that have come for the big majors, like the ones we are cutting in the NFL, which will, the NFL is a juggernaut. It will continue to grow. It'll look different than those, but the value will continue to rise.
Yeah. Now, this fund is closed.
It is not closed.
It's not closed. It's open.
Closed. Yes, and the focus initially is ultra high net worth family offices, both that have had an interest in sports and that are aligned with the mission,
right,
and care about this. But it is commercial terms. And so these are sophisticated family offices that are trying to make money. This is not a social impact fund. Ultimately, what we want to be able to do is bring in investors that also can add their own expertise and their knowledge to the profile. And it might be hard for them to own a single team or too high risk for them to own a single team. This is going to give them access to multiple teams and the entire ecosystem to take advantage of the full growth over time.
Are you having to go in there to pitch people? Like,
oh yeah, I am rolling.
How do you pitch billionaires to invest $1 billion?
I am rolling with Melody Hobson on this, and I'm learning for her as we go. But actually, it's easy to pitch because we believe in it.
Yeah,
it's easy. I always say it's easy to tell a good story when you mean it. And when you're not lying, we believe this.
Yeah,
we believe this. The fundamentals are there. Even the influence that female athletes have is massive. They are 2 times more influential than their male counterparts across all social media platforms. And that's in impressions, in their reach. Like, this is women's moment in sports. And it is not a DEI thing. This is not a social impact thing. It's just the money is there, and it's the right moment.
How does your day-to-day change now that you're going from an NFL team president to Ariel Investments? Like, what is your day-to-day now in this new role?
Yeah, a lot of it is working with our portfolio companies and the targets. So that's a lot like my other role. It's a little bit operational, just from a step further removed. More like when I was a consultant at McKinsey, somewhere in between McKinsey consultant and operating the team. So really giving advice to the principal owner, helping to build the leadership teams, helping some of these folks that are targets in advance of us even fully being invested, help them think about some big strategic decisions they have. So that's part of my time. A big part of my time is fundraising and telling people the story I've shared here about where women's sports is going and why uniquely I think we'll be able to help them ride that wave as investors. And then a big portion of my time is building our internal team and learning the Ariel culture and being good contributors to that culture. So whether it's in the San Francisco office, the Chicago office, or this week here in the New York office, it's meeting people, it's meeting board members, understanding the great sets of wealth and advice that they have to bring to bear for us. You know, like I can call on Arnie Duncan to talk about how investing in college sports would impact, academic outcomes and student formation. Like who has that, right? So I'm spending time learning and approaching this with all the right humility. Because while I know operating a franchise, there's a lot I don't know.
Yeah. And
thankfully, there's a bench of people around me, like sitting with John Rogers for drinks in Chicago and getting the wealth of his history. It's really amazing and remarkable. And I'm trying to spend good time doing that as well.
Yeah. Speaking of stories, man, I was watching another interview that you did, at my former stomping grounds, CNBC, and, Melanie Hobson was discussing how she had saw you at a conference.
Yeah.
And she chased you. She knew that she wanted to talk to you about this fund and growing it. And she would spend time with you. What did she say to you to convince you to come over? Because here you are, right? You can go anywhere, built up a pretty good track record.
Yeah.
But what did she say to you? What was that meeting that got you
I think
yes?
Melody does her research and she finds out what makes people tick. Yeah. I'm a problem solver. And I have this track record as an operator, which has turned out to be very attractive to folks that we're investing in. They've wanted that, and that's why they've opened their cap tables for us. But she knew I was a problem solver. And so she came to me and said, I have this idea. It was probably much more formed than she let on.
Yeah.
She's like, I have this idea. I think this space is growing, and I agreed with it. I'm a researcher. I knew what was happening in women's sports. How should we invest in this? And before I knew it, I was shaping this portfolio with her just in my spare time because she's Melody Hobson. And she asked me for help and support. And about a month into doing that, I realized I wanted to do this. And she sort of made the ask, like, well, you're kind of engaged on this now. Would you want to run this for me? I was like, you got me. You got me. This was a complete trap to make sure that I was all in. And by the time we had shaped it together, I was a firm believer and ready to run with it.
And it didn't even take a call from George Lucas.
It did not. It did not. Although I will say this, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, as we've discussed before. She probably knew that as well. But I've met him now in spending time with Melody, and I can say I have held my professional decorum in every moment when the 12-year-old me on the inside is wanting to ask random nerd trivia about Star Wars anthology lore, and I have held it all in so I don't freak this man out because I want to be a long-term friend of this man.
Well, man, listen, take me back to that 12-year-old Star Wars nerd, right? You know what I mean? For those people who don't know, you grew up in Los Angeles, right? You mentioned all the criteria for your mom, but she was also a flight attendant,
right?
That's right. And, your dad, insurance salesman. What was Jason Wright back then? Like, what did you want to do? Like, was it always a football player, or did you want to be Darth Vader?
I think I knew that I wanted to get out and see the world. I don't think I had I said I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I had a narrative from my parents to satisfy them. But as far as what I really wanted, I knew I wanted to get out. As much as I loved growing up in Cali, I wanted to get out. I wanted to see the world. And I wanted something that would combine creativity. Because as much as I'm a pragmatic, logical, analytical business thinker, in my personal life, I'm a creative. I like being around the arts. I like that sort of influence. So I want something with creativity. I want something that has meaning. And I want something that I do with people that I really fool with. That's the way I would phrase it. Yeah. And this opportunity with Ariel has hit all those criteria. And it has a chance to make real generational wealth for our LPs. And for me to do great by my family in the process. Yeah. And it's hard to have found something better. I feel incredibly blessed.
Yeah. As you're transitioning, you're young Jason, right? You go to Northwestern, obviously play football, right? What are you picking up at Northwestern? What are you learning? What's your soundtrack to life? Is it Tupac at that point? What are you listening to?
What? It changed because I was in a new space.
Yeah.
When I think of Northwestern, I think of Chicago house music. Because I got to know some of my local classmates, both athletes and non-athletes, really well. And they take me down the south side of Chicago to the house parties in the cities where they had grown up, south side Chicago, south suburbs. Yeah. And I remember them doing all that footwork. And I was like, what is this? We know Seawalking where I'm from. That's different. Yeah. So I remember college for me, especially being outside of California, which is kind of a bubble, was getting introduced to all these different forms of culture that existed and a new different way of living, from house music to steppers balls to the NPHC network with all the Black Greek organizations across the Midwest, to cleaning off my car from snow.
Yeah.
And digging my car out of snow to drive somewhere.
That must have been a rude awakening for you too. Right?
Literally, the fact that you got to get out in nature and be cold and dirty.
No more palm trees.
That's not what we were doing growing up. Like, just that little stuff gives you a grit and an edge. And I had an amazing head coach at Northwestern who also since passed, Randy Walker, who saw that I was just a little bit soft and a little bit of a prima donna coming in. And while I was charismatic, I can convince most people to like kind of leave me alone, let me do my thing, get away with stuff. He saw through my BS. And he really mentored me and grew me as a man in a way that I am really grateful for. Same lessons my dad was giving me, but you don't listen to your parents in the same way.
Right.
You know, Randy Walker really helped shape me as a man. And so that when I think of Northwestern, those are the things I think about.
Yeah. Northwestern. What did you go there for? I've got a great friend up there, and Donde. He's in a journalism department, great journalism school.
Amazing
what did you go there for?
Well, it was by default. So my parents were sticklers about education.
Right.
And they said, if you're going to go off and play football in college, there has to be a certain ranking of the school that's going to allow us to do that, because football is going to take your time. Football is going to take your attention. And if you do that at a school that is mostly social, we don't trust you. And they were right. They were right. I would have had a different outcome if I had gone to a party school that also had a great football program.
Yeah.
Didn't have the self-control for that. So they said, you're going to go to a Stanford, a Cal, a Duke, a Vanderbilt, a Northwestern. Those were the types of places I looked at. Stanford offered me on defense. I thought I was the best running back ever in the history of life, so I told them no. Cal offered me and then rescinded my offer when they got a running back they liked better. And Northwestern would have been my third choice. I went there on the visit. It was 40 degrees and sunny, which I thought was freezing cold.
Yeah.
Coming from Cali.
Thought it was probably as cold as it's going to get.
Yeah, literally this. And I said this to the recruiting coordinator, who's defensive coordinator, Jerry Brown. Amazing man. And I said to him, Coach Brown, I really like this place. I love the students here. It feels like my kind of people. I want to experience a new region, but it's just a little too cold here. I don't think I can do this. And he looks me in the eyes and he says, Jason, this was the coldest weekend of the year. It never gets this cold here. If you could handle this, you can handle anything. Lied to my face. Lied to my face, to the point when I was first there in the winter, I was cursing this man's name because it was -2, sideways snow.
Yeah.
But that's how I got convinced that it all goes back to these moments that you don't think of.
Right.
When a brand or an idea or something hits you at a sensitive moment. I was heading into, I think, my junior year of high school when Northwestern made the Rose Bowl. And they came to Pasadena. And I happened to be at the Rose Parade with my dad. His office was down there near Pasadena, right near my barbershop that I grew up going to in Pasadena, Luke Walker's barbershop. And they came by in all the purple. And I was like, what is this? I like these uniforms. I like the color. And my dad was like, actually, Jason, that's a really good school. That's the kind of school we'd want you to go to. And so I was open to it. You just never know where those things are going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you go to Northwestern. And 3 to 5 years is the span of an NFL career, they say, right? And you're probably in that, right? How many years you spent in
7 years.
7 years, right? So you're in that 3 to 7 year range. How did you get to that 7 years, right? Because you passed the 3 to 5 year thing. You get to the 10. And if you don't get the 10 out paying, you're not available. You can't get the pension if I'm reading the rules correctly.
No. It's pension is 3.5 years.
It's pension is 3 then.
That's phenomenal. 3.5. So
I thought it was like 10.
No,
maybe in the NBA is 10. You
might
be
NBA.
That's certain, yeah.
Might be NBA.
But how did you get to that 7 years, and what advice do you give players who are asking for like, hey, how do you get through the NFL?
That's good. Maybe 2 pieces of advice. I'll tell the story first of my first year and a half, which I think was the most formative. Yeah. I was not drafted. I got cut in 2 weeks of training camp with the San Francisco 49ers, landed with the Atlanta Falcons on the practice squad. And I spent my first year up and down off the practice squad, active roster, to sitting at home on my aunt and uncle's couch in Lithonia, Georgia. I think I made $30,000 my rookie year total. So I had to budget, try to make ends meet. I had a car that was too expensive. I had to do everything. And I had to find my sense of worth and self outside of football.
Yeah.
In the community around me, my church community, my family, the friends I made. Like, I made friends with the used car salesman who sold me the car. He's still a friend of mine to this day. We're like family to this day. He actually lives in Cali now. Our kids know each other. I found these sources of strength to help me maintain my confidence in the face of failure. in those moments. Because if everything is defined by your success on the field and your only social network, the only people you have to talk to exist in football, when you're not allowed in that building, it's a spiral. It's a very fast downward spiral in your confidence, your ability to bounce back, your belief that you can make it. But because I had these sources of strength, insight, and protection that sat outside of that, call it an uncorrelated return with the market, I had a sense of strength that other people didn't have that helped me to get through that. And then the other side of it is I realized just like you need to be in business or in anything, the more things you can do, the more valuable you are to the team. And so simple things that other people don't want to do, like run the practice squad cards the way they should be run, like read the tackle the way they are, play hard even though it pisses off the starting defense, be willing to get into a fight in practice because you're actually playing hard, study extra film, spend time helping the starters with their craft, and then do the little things that matter. Step up into the A gap and hit a blitzing middle linebacker in the mouth instead of step into the side. Put yourself in the physical harm in order to do the little things that protect your team. Be good at special teams. I made myself the type of player where you could fill multiple roster spots with just me. And that made me more valuable and allowed me to stick around for good. And then maybe the last thing I'll say to people, and this is about life and not just the NFL, but it was certainly true for me. Nothing is a meritocracy. The NFL may be the closest thing that we see to a meritocracy because the eye in the sky don't lie. We watch film. But still, the way I finally caught on and stopped getting fired every other week was because there was somebody who believed in me. Running backs coach in Cleveland under Romeo Crennel is a guy named Dave Atkins. And Dave is someone who believed in my talent for the long haul. And he went out of his way to make a space for me on that team. We call it sponsorship in the business world. I had an advocate and a sponsor there. And then thankfully, the next running backs coach, Anthony Lynn, who's now with the Commanders, also believed in me and put space for me on that team. And if it isn't for those two men, my career doesn't take off. And so, yes, do all the little things, make yourself available, perform at a high level, but ultimately someone's got to give you that shot. And so it pays time. It's worth every moment to tell your story to as many people as you can and build advocates wherever you can.
Yeah. And the one thing I love about your story, too, is that you also, while you were playing, were still establishing your outside world in the business world, right? You got to tell them the red suit story, right? Because that didn't make it to my article, right? That got cut out of my... So you got to share the red suit story. I'm sure people don't even know about that.
No,
Does Melanie Hobson know about the red suit story?
No, but she's not going to be surprised.
There you go.
She's not going to be surprised.
The oversized red suit story.
So when I got to business school, what Jabari is referencing, when I got to business school, I was raw.
Yes.
And I actually got the same feedback. I only had one offer. McKinsey was my only offer for a summer internship. And so I got the same feedback from every firm. It's some version of, you're surprisingly good at math for a former NFL player. You've got great leadership stories, and we think you'll be good over the long haul. Maybe the only people with better leadership stories are the military veterans, but you're really raw. You don't speak the business language, and we think you're going to be a terrible day one associate. That was the feedback. For McKinsey, that was an offer. For everybody else, that was a turn down, come back later. But part of that was how I showed up.
Yes.
So, you're supposed to dress your nicest when you go to these interviews. I showed up in what I thought was my nicest suit. It was a
suit.
black
the
and
one that
red.
Bishop Down and Wine gave you when you was in Chicago.
Black and red pinstripe suit with a bright red shirt, a black and red striped tie, with the red pocket square, with the fake black gator shoes, not even real gator shoes, the fake black gator shoes. I just knew I looked better than everybody else. And it took one of my classmates pulling me to the side after interview, and I had gotten passed through to the second round of a couple consulting interviews. He was like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to discover Brooks Brothers together.
Exactly.
And we're going to get you a proper suit.
Yeah.
And I showed up to my final McKinsey interview in a proper suit, and I got my offer. And it has been a continual learning experience of how the culture I grew up in may not inform the culture of the place where I need to be in the future.
Yeah. I asked you to share that story because we're in this age now. So many young people, man, you can dress how you want to dress. Now, I see people running around with Jordans on and suits. Not my style. I'm not knocking anybody else's style. It's not my style. But then you also see there are young people that'll come, and I'm looking at them in some job interview. They'll show up just like it's just comfortable for them. It's like, man, the pandemic
pajamas.
Really, and it's like, man, the pandemic really did a mark on you guys. And so I asked you to share that story. Is that still important today to make sure that you're showing up in the proper attire and to really take that serious? Because I still don't think people take their attire seriously when it goes into business.
And it's not just attire. It's conforming to the norms of the industry. And that's become a bad word over the last few years. And it's been countered by messages like, you should be able to bring your whole self to work, et cetera. I don't believe that.
Yes.
I don't believe that.
No.
But here's why, and I just have a different lens on it. In order to have impact in these spaces, they have had a way of being that has been created over hundreds of years. And it may not seem fair. It may mean that the cultural mores you come from or your preferred way of being requires more sacrifice than maybe someone from another background. But in order to have I'm focused on impact. I want to use this industry to change the lives of people that wouldn't get access to it otherwise. Mm-hmm. That's ultimately my career goal in anything that I do over the long haul. In order to do that, I'm willing to make a bunch of personal sacrifices in order to get the influence and space to get there. Now, when you get there and you have space and influence, you can create a different cultural environment there for you and your team. And you can give other people more permissive guidelines in that setting. But until you have that authority and until you have that space, in my opinion, it's worth it on the margins to do something here. That you can't compromise your core values. You can't compromise your integrity, but you certainly can put on a suit. Yeah. You certainly can do something different with the way that you speak in a business meeting, in the way that you word an email, the timeliness in which you respond. All that hygiene is really important.
Biggest positive surprise post NFL career?
It's probably on the personal side, and that's getting back to California and being near my kids. Yeah. I've been doing this bi-coastal thing to see my kids and have them in the summers in DC. We're based out of San Francisco. We're working at Melody's and Ariel's San Francisco office. And so I get to live near my kids in Southern California. And the rhythm of life with my kids is amazing.
No, man, it's nothing like it.
And if I had to pick a business one, what we did at the Commanders, growing revenue by 50%, nine times EBITDA, selling the team at a record price for the sports industry writ large. It created a reputation and a network of people that not only believe in me as an operator, and I wasn't sure that exists. You never know if that exists. Not only believe in me as an operator, but are willing to help me tee up opportunities. And it's why we've had, people talk about proprietary deal flow, and I think it's kind of a BS word most of the time. But so I won't call it that, but we have had inordinate and unusual deal flow at the start of this. And I'm really grateful to all the people that have brought that. People have moved folks off of their cap table to bring us on. And all of the negotiations that we've had so far have been that scenario. We saved this space and now we want you to do it. And like I said, it's a combination of Melody's sterling reputation and Ariel's sterling reputation over time in sports as well. And the fact that people know what we did at the Commanders, especially people in the industry, know really where it started. And to see it where it is and to have that validation feels really good. And it has me running into this next era really strong.
Yeah. Short sample size, but I'm in a Wawa. Right? For those people who don't know, Wawa is a little convenient place. When I'm in a Wawa and I see a person with the old logo, right, the Washington logo. And they're having dialogue and the person notices the logo and it says, yeah, I'm not changing. I'm going to call them that forever. Are we entering a time where the Commander, get that name return? Right, because we're in a very, very interesting area, a very interesting time in our country where a lot of things that we thought were buried are now making a return. Could you see the Commanders going back?
I am so glad to not have to officially opine on this anymore. Thank God. It makes me so happy that I really don't have a stake in that game anymore. What I'll say about the DC community is people love the old name and logo, and even folks of all different backgrounds. And ideologies, which was new for me. I'm outside of the market. I didn't know that. People love that old name. And it was really a hard process to move on and transition. And so my guess is the team will find a way to honor the history of the team,
but not go back,
without entering back into anything that distracts from the amazing things that are happening on the field right now. And that's a super smart ownership group there. They'll handle it with deft. and intelligence and grace, understanding the rich history of the team and how much people care about that and how much they associate that with the old name, brand, and image.
Yeah.
And
well,
so,
you know where I stand on that, man. I text you. You should have went with the Hogs. I said the Red Hogs.
I like that one.
You should have went with the
Red
Red
Hogs. I like Red
Hogs
a lot. I like Red Hogs. I like Red Tails. I liked a lot of those.
Should have been the Red Hogs, man.
It's going well right now.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I'd say, Jaden Daniels has been nothing but a commander, and he's a pretty good brand ambassador.
Absolutely.
So I think they're in good shape.
Yeah.
I think they're in good shape.
Do you still speak with Dan Snyder at all?
No, I don't.
So
I don't. I haven't spoken to. I mean, I was pretty busy continuing to run the team. So no, I haven't spoken to him, and but I hope they're doing incredibly well.
Yeah. Look ahead, close, man. I think I know how you made your first million, right? Playing football, right? How did you spend it? Anything you do differently?
Certainly. I would certainly do things differently. I think there's this interesting thing with athletes where the confidence that allows you to be successful on the field, which is a confidence that say the rules don't apply to you. Yes, the percentages apply to everybody else, but for me, I made it to the NFL. That means I'm 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% of high school football players that made it to the NFL. So when you've defied the odds regularly like that, it's hard to turn off that part of your brain when it comes to investing or spending your money. Yeah, I heard people don't make money on music labels or fashion brands or investing in real estate without the right advice, but I'm the exception to the rule. I always have been. And so you have this risk-taking mindset without informed risk-taking that can get you in trouble. And often people have surrounded themselves with yes people, whether they be financial advisors or agents or others, who will only so strongly tell them to pump the brakes. And so I did less of that because I didn't surround myself with yes people, but every once in a while I wouldn't tell somebody about something. And I poured some money into a money pit of a real estate investment early on, just off of my own first principles thinking, which was completely misinformed. But I'm glad I had that moment. It didn't, it cost me hundreds of thousands, not millions. And it helped me to learn to seek the right advice going forward, to be more measured in my approach. It didn't scare off my risk taking because I still got that gene in me. But it helped me to make sure I took informed risk and always had the right perspectives in place.
Gen AI, you hear that phrase? What's nobody talking about?
Yes, generative AI.
Yeah.
So generative AI is going to revolutionize the way that we do business. I think there's obviously people are talking about the efficiency gains that come from it. And for all the complaints of Gen Z in the workplace and productivity and all that, they're great at using generative AI to do things that used to be time-suck menial tasks and initial primary research where you can then go and validate in QC. I think it's already a great proof case there and can really get some efficiencies in how you operate, can maybe save headcount for organizations, and can make people's workload lighter so they're working on more high-value added activities. So I think that proof case is there. I think the future of that usefulness and future applications of how much it can do higher value work, complex solutions, start to move into more qualitative thinking and strategic thinking depends on the data that it's fed. And it comes to the same thing that we've had all the time with AI before it was generative AI, is the data set informs how smart it is. And it also informs the people that will benefit from it. And so while algorithmic bias was a big question in the development of technology in the last 20 years, I'll always give the example, it's probably 15 years old now, but the example of the hand washing machines or hand washing sensors.
Yeah, can't detect.
They were all trained on lighter skin tones. And so when the initial set of those rolled out, the first generation of the technology, you couldn't get it if you were, didn't pass the paper bag test, right? And so algorithmic bias is a thing that can prevent the success of products, can prevent the accuracy of how Gen AI develops and the people that benefit from it. Because if I'm looking for something outside of the sphere of what is being fed, it's not going to be that accurate, and it's going to throw me off. And so I think those concerns are evergreen, but I think it's a potentially very productive technology for all of us. And if it's fed the right information, can start to triangulate all the sources of misinformation that exist on the internet. It can propagate misinformation if it doesn't have the counterpoints, but it can also help you question misinformation, which I think is a really important thing in this day and age.
Yeah. You worked at McKinsey and you worked on their racial wealth gap reports while your time there, right? 2.1 trillion spending power is projected by the Black community by 2026. Nielsen says, confirmed. When you hear that figure, what comes to mind?
I mean, it's still true. That's what I say. I think wealth getting to places where it has not normally been unlocks new spending and new economic growth for everybody. And so it's still there. The opportunity is still there. So that's really the big takeaway for me. And I guess the reminder I'd give everybody is like closing the racial wealth gap, or it doesn't have to be racial wealth gap. It can be socioeconomic. It can be regional. You know, there's a big divide in wealth in rural and urban areas in this country. Closing any of those gaps unlocks new consumer activity. It's net new. And that is money in everybody's pockets. The people that were profiting before will continue to profit at a greater rate. And people that weren't profiting before will begin to participate in the economy at a higher level. So it is a unifying message. And while race is one lens to look at it and would unlock additional productivity in the economy, it's all these others as well. It's gender, it's socioeconomic background, it's region.
Yeah. Guy, man, corporatepreneur is what he likes to call it. It's like a corporate entrepreneur, but it's his brother, Robert Johnson, down in Atlanta. And he pitched me a panel for my summit. And it's Corporatepreneurship 101. Act like a leader, think like a strategist. Is what it is. I love that phrase, corporatepreneur, because as many people want to be entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
We got corporate America too. And
yes.
What trait, feeding off of Robert's, idea in the panel, and I appreciate Robert, what trait do you think every individual should have if they're trying to climb the corporate ladder?
The ability to build coalitions.
Ability to build coalitions.
Yeah.
Why that?
Because even if you have the best idea, you come up with the most innovative thought, it's not going to get traction within any corporate bureaucracy unless you can build allies. So you need to not only have the brightest idea, but you need to either yourself communicate it in a compelling way, understand the social network of that organization, of who are the real decision makers. It's not always who's in the hierarchy. The decision maker can be hidden somewhere else. They might have outsized influence on the CEO or the head of innovation or new product development, someone who's going to get that idea to take off and give you the capital you need to invest and grow it. You have to work the system, and you have to be willing to do that. And I think a lot of smart folks, and a lot of us in general who are just tired of playing corporate politics, are like, I don't want to have to do that. It shouldn't be that way. The way it should be is if I have the best and brightest idea, it should just rise to the surface. That's a recipe for it being a great idea that sits on the heap of history. So you have to be ready to run the campaign behind your idea.
Yeah. Love that. Get you out of here, man. Good to great. Right. It would be easy to ask you what's the difference between a good running back and a great one. But
yes.
I've talked to Marcus Colston. We had Brandon Marshall. I've been going too much
You're basically saying you've talked to people who were better football players than me, so you don't need to hear it from me.
Say it that way,
That's what you said.
But guess what, though? They never ran a franchise, though. So I'll ask you this, good to great, feeding off the great Jim Collins' book. What's the difference between a good NFL franchise and a great one?
That's good. I'm going to land on one thing. I think it is a steadfast dedication to their strategy and the ability to block out distractions and the temptation to have knee-jerk reactions to the things going on around you. When you hire a head coach, when you hire a general manager, when an ownership group comes in and says, this is the values we're going to have, this is how we're going to grow the business, it is really easy to look at the new shiny thing that's being successful somewhere else and say, okay, I know we said this was a plan, but let's pivot and do that. I think the organizations that have been perpetually successful over time have built systems and they've stayed dedicated to it, even if the trend of the day seems different. That's how the Patriots built their dynasty in my playing time. They were early users of analytics and behavioral economics. That's a lesser known thing, but they didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want anybody copying. And when other people were doing different things with their roster building, signing stars, etc., they continued to offload folks at their prime and come in and get people who are in a more cost-effective position and were more role players. They zagged while everybody else zigged because they stayed dedicated to their philosophy. And I think ownership groups, and especially leaders of the sporting side of any organization, if you can set your philosophy and you can stay dedicated to it, even when the media headlines and things are championing other people, you in the long run will do well, because it's the herky jerk and the bouncing all around that never lets you build anything substantial.
Love that, man. Jason Wright, no longer the president of Commanders, but managing partner right now at Ariel Investments. Project level. Check it out. See you next time.